G'day champions, it's finally time to get back into this fiberglass boat build. Feels like it's been under the tarp for about 2 years due to a number of reasons, but I'm still fully pumped to get this thing done. So we'll rip this tarp off, see where we're up to, and see what the next stage is. All right, let's have a look. So, on the inside here, I've been sort of making 2 rear quarter seats and a well, which these boats normally don't have. And up the front, we've got some storage lockers as well and a casting deck. You can see the previous videos for all the stringers and the floor build. All the hull, top sides and stuff, everything's repaired, ready for another layer of gel coat and finish, but there's a bit to do before then. There's going to be storage lockers under these quarter seats, and I'm thinking also there's a bit of storage in these spaces here too, so we'll see. Maybe a backrest here that has a hole under it that sort of pops up. But the next stage I need to do is none of this rear quarter seat section or the top of that casting deck is stuck down yet, because the insides need a coat of glass and tabbing and flow coat and whatnot. So that's the next stage of this project. So I'll take these lids off, tab all of the bulkheads in on the insides, flow coat the chain locker and storage and the storage down the back sections and the underside of these lids, and then I can epoxy them down, screw them down. There's always a fair bit of work getting a boat just how you like it and doing things properly. So I've gone ahead and epoxied on some little wedges right the way around for this whole rear quarter seat and well section to adhere to. This sort of setup I have designed, those two will act like big knees for the transom and the motor. Also the whole rear section here adds to the rigidity of this transom. So when I epoxy this top down, it'll actually have this lip to sit to as well, all the way along the back, and then I'll be able to tab in the top as well. These will be fiberglassed onto the sides, so it will be quite a strong sort of setup. This is all sanded now with 40 grit, ready for laminating. Same with this whole front section. Still needs to be wiped down with acetone and a paper towel, paper rags, and then I can laminate and tab these bulkheads both in and the inside of that back section. So I decided yesterday afternoon I would cove all these corners in preparation for lamination today. Just putting a radius on these corners. The reason I did that yesterday is there will end up quite a fair bit of thickness in some of these spots of resin and peanut butter mix if I was to do it all in one go. And in the past I've had the thick sections sort of burn the resin. So I've opted to do this just to stop that from happening. It is done with laminating resin mix, so it's not going to be an issue. It's still tacky, so I can laminate straight over that. So the next stage is I'm going to go ahead and cover all of the Thermalite and any areas that I'm going to be laminating with a straight mixed resin mix, so no thickening in it, just to seal the boards. And when that starts to go tacky, then I'll start laminating onto it. Without doing that, sometimes a porous product, so plywood or Thermalite, can actually suck a bit of resin out of your chop strand mat and double bias or woven roving, whatever you're using, and you won't get quite the lamination adhesion to the panels as you would like. So I'll go ahead and resin coat this whole area now. Make sure you always have your personal protection items like a mask. Make sure the filters are okay for filtering out chemicals. Wear gloves always. You don't want this stuff on your skin. I like to have a couple of spare sets of gloves for if these rip, I can quickly whip them off and put some new gloves on. Definitely you don't want the chemicals in your lungs, so make sure masks, very important. So for smaller areas you can use a brush to apply the resin, but I really like these little nap rollers for larger areas. I think that's a 4mm little nap roller, so it does a really good job. Try and get quite a bit on, and then I use that roller to just sort of feather it out and make sure there's no lumps and chunky bits of resin. So everything has had a coat now of resin. It's called giving it a hot coat before you start laminating with your glass matting. So you can see here, the board itself is actually drawing in and sucking in a little bit of the resin, which is not a bad thing, but if you were to put your glass matting down and try and laminate without doing this, the board, whether it's, plywood or this thermalite stuff, is going to be drawing a little bit of resin out of your glass matting, and it can really affect the bond. It can be like a dry sort of layout because it's just sucking the moisture out of it. So it's really important, especially with porous stuff, to give it a hot coat first. Not so bad when you're going over fiberglass like that, which is pretty sealed. You can see how nicely the new resin has sort of covered that. But the porous boards, sort of sections where it's sucking a little bit in. So another thing you got to be very careful of is temperature. It's just starting to warm up a little bit. So I've put up my shade tent just so I'm not in direct sunlight. So keep an eye on the temperature. So it's important to wet down the area you're going to be fiberglassing or laminating with a straight catalyzed resin mix before you add any of your glass materials. So I'm just adding some chop strand mat there. You always start with chop strand mat before you used any woven materials or double bias or anything like that. Then you go ahead and you start wetting out your matting. You don't want to add so much resin at this stage so that you're, got runs everywhere and you're leaving big puddles of resin at the bottom of where you're working. You just want to add the right amount that is going to wet out that material thoroughly. So you'll notice the materials start to become less white in color as it accepts more resin. So once you have the right amount of resin on your fiberglass material, this is a little roller you use to consolidate and remove any air bubbles from the material. So now that that base layer of chop strand mat is sorted, I can go ahead and add, I'm using double bias material here. It's a very strong material, and I will add a little bit more resin to that and consolidate that as well. But if I want to add extra layers of woven material or double bias, I need to go ahead and add another layer of chop strand between them. So you can see there as I'm consolidating that the white color is disappearing in that double bias. So what's happening there is the material is actually accepting more resin into itself as I sort of consolidate it, and the styrene in that product is dissolving. So if your fiberglass material is still white in color, you probably need to go ahead and add a little bit more resin to it or consolidate it better. So I've gone ahead and laminated all of my tabbing in, including some chop strand mat from the little rail there down to the hull. The reason I've done this tabbing before I've just gone ahead and done chop strand over all of this thermalite is because you've got to watch the thickness of your laminations as you laminate, because it can, if it's too thick, start going off too quickly because of the chemical reaction, and it can ruin the resin and also the strength of the finished product. So just be careful how thick you laminate. So you wouldn't go ahead and put, you know, 5 layers of 600 gram material, because it would end up burning the resin. So now once this starts getting, so that's gelled up, I can now go ahead and lay up my next coats on that. So with your chopped strand matting, it's better to tear it rather than cut it, because it leaves a smoother edge when you lap your next pieces on. So you can see that piece I've just put into the hull has a torn edge wrapping down onto the hull where the next piece will step onto it, rather than having two sort of cut edges that are going to lip up onto each other. It just makes for a very smooth transition between each lap. So once that laminating had cured, I'm applying the first coat of flow coat, and I'll be applying a second coat after that has set. Got some laminating done this afternoon. That's the underside of the rear quarter seats and the outboard well for my sea wasp, and the front casting deck underside. Hopefully it's warm enough to do a bit more tomorrow and flow coat the underside of these so I can glue them in the boat. So I've got the front casting deck on now. All the lockers are tabbed, laminated and flow coated, including the underside of all these tops. Same with the rear section, rear quarter seats, outboard well.